Good morning, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. And the intensity around this game between Georgia and Alabama continues to ratchet up. A big example of that on today's program, Georgia players apparently very aware and making their feelings known about what can, I think, be described as some trash talk from Jalen Milroe, the Alabama quarterback, after the Crimson Tide got the win against Alabama, I should say against Georgia in the SEC championship last year. We'll begin with that today, and we'll give you more chatter coming out of Tuscaloosa of a very, very confident Alabama fan base here today. That plus injury talk today, the latest on Warren Brinson, the latest on Mikael Williams, Mike Griffith stops by, and what has become a real staple for us on Wednesdays, a terrific conversation with the former Dog himself, Davin Bellamy, about his thoughts about how it goes down between Georgia and Alabama there on Saturday. We will cover all of that ground. We're happy to have you with us as we do it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Breda Pest Management, the official pest control of UGA Athletics.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Our agenda this week's been pretty clear. We've been telling you that if we have a way of sort of stirring the pot and kind of creating a little bit of a fever pitch of emotion ahead of the Georgia game against Alabama, we kind of want to do that. It's sort of fun, I think. I mean, Georgia seems to be at its best sometimes when there's a little bit of an edge to the atmosphere, when Georgia fans are a little bit, kind of spicy or whatever you want, however you want to describe it. Georgia just sometimes seems to get a really strong performance in moments like that. So if we can conjure that up, we're just going to try to. And we've been doing that the last few days. Gave you an example yesterday of perhaps some evidence that some of our attempt to do that's starting to work. We had Arian Smith in the show yesterday saying, hey, we're not going to be, whatever about what they're saying about us, basically letting it be known that some of the Georgia players do have an idea of what's being said about them and this game there on Saturday. We've admitted openly we're not afraid to play the role of instigator in situations like this because, as I said before, it just sort of seems to get a pretty good version of Georgia out of it when things like that go down. And if you want to go back to last week, one of the things that we used to kind of get all this going was something that actually took place many months ago. We even talked about this several months in the past, but kind of renewed, fresh and anew here this week because obviously it's the two teams playing again. The fact that the Alabama quarterback, Jalen Milroe, had gone on the radio station in Birmingham, WJOX, and had really had a lot of boastful, bragging things to say about his team and his win against Georgia. And frankly, what he saw as a character deficiency in Georgia from that loss, something that Jalen Milroe said he recognized during the game. And you can only imagine how this must sit with Georgia players, and we're not afraid to use it. Splash it out there, blast it out there, get as much attention as we can for it because we kind of like the idea of getting this team fired up for Saturday. We played it for you Friday. It's in the news again today. So as a reminder, this is the Alabama quarterback, Jalen Milroe from WJOX.
I'm big on body language and looking in the opponent's eyes. They looked defeated and they didn't want any more. And I knew that, our team knew it was going to be a 60-minute game, and Georgia didn't believe in that.
I'm big on body language. Our team knew it was going to be a 60-minute game. They looked defeated. Georgia didn't believe in that. I mean, can you imagine? Can you imagine a Georgia player saying that about an opponent? Would never happen. Obviously, this is an example of the sort of substitute teacher mentality that seemed to kind of creep into the final days of Nick Saban as a head coach, clearly not in control of that program the way that he once was. Obviously, that's true. Otherwise, you wouldn't have players going into business for themselves like this during radio interviews. That's, to me, a pretty volatile statement. And as I said before, you got to imagine that if you're a Georgia player, you're probably not too happy about this. This guy says, I saw it in your eye. You didn't want it. You quit on the field. You didn't play for 60 minutes. You didn't have the same level of toughness and intensity that our team had. Now, Alabama did win the game, so those players, I guess, have a right to say whatever they want to, and that's how Jalen Milroe chose to exercise his right, bragging about the fact that Georgia, in his eyes, was weak in that game last year. Unmistakable, the message from the Alabama quarterback right there. Now, I've said a couple of times, you can only imagine how Georgia players must be responding to this. Well, the good news is today, we don't have to imagine that anymore. We now know that this thing that we've pushed a couple of times here over the last few days has made its way into the Georgia locker room and presumably to the Georgia practice field ahead of this game on Saturday. Georgia players, a couple of them yesterday, making it very clear how they feel about all of this. Let me start with one of the key leaders on the offensive side of the ball, Dylan Fairchild, who was asked directly, do you know about this? Have you heard about this? And Fairchild spoke out on the issue while also trying to keep some of the emotions in-house, but Fairchild making it pretty clear this is an exchange he had yesterday with a couple of reporters, including our Connor Riley.
Is the team aware of, I guess, of comments made by Jalen Milroe after the game last year about how he felt the team quit during the game?
Yeah, I mean, we're aware for sure. We're aware.
How did you react when you heard those comments?
Put my head down and grind. I think that's the attitude of our team, you know. Just put our head down and grind.
I mean, first of all, like Dylan Fairchild is such like a tough-looking dude, right? I mean, so tough to me, you know, obviously imposing on the football field. A small number of words there carry so much weight to me when Dylan Fairchild says, we're aware, and then stares right through the reporter who asked the question. We're aware. And then Connor asked the follow-up, well, okay, well, how do you feel about that? And Dylan Fairchild says, feelings. I don't have feelings. I just have actions. I don't feel anything. I just act. And my action in response to that is to grind. I like that. And if you're a Georgia fan, I think you like that too. And admittedly, some of our attempt to do this is, you know, pretty contrived. But at the same time, if it results in Dylan Fairchild looking like that, for those of you watching on video, during a press conference ahead of the game on Saturday, mission accomplished. Because that's exactly the sort of edge I want Georgia to have. Dylan Fairchild, how do you feel about that? I don't feel anything. I don't have feelings. I just simply grind, and now I'm grinding even harder than I was grinding before. Now, another key leader for Georgia on the defensive side of the ball, Malaki Starks, was asked about it there too. And once again, not wanting to like give the store away here, give the game away in terms of, you know, how he felt about it either, but certainly giving a little bit more of a window into the actions that Georgia may take as a response to a guy who looked across the field and said, you quit last year. I saw it in your eyes. You didn't want it. What does Malaki Starks says that means to him and his unit in the attempt to stop Jalen Milroe on Saturday? Here's Malaki Starks on the same subject.
Yeah, I think, you know, it is what it is. I think, you know, that's this kind of defense we got. We're a very competitive defense. We believe that we're very strong and physical and fast, and that's how we play the game of football. You know, you come to Georgia to play defense, and I think that's what it is. And you know, like they have a great offense, so we got back to work for sure. It's not really a thing that we try to harp on too much. We just want to go out there and be the best defense that we can be.
It's worth noting that Jalen Milroe met with reporters yesterday. He was not asked about his comments in the radio interview months ago. Perhaps not the first time the Alabama media has failed to meet the moment. But either way, Georgia players clearly aware of this, clearly knowing about this, and clearly seeming to want to do something about it. And to give you more evidence of exactly how true that might be, you know, Kirby Smart, who does not typically hold back when he thinks that practices haven't been very good, when he thinks his team's emotion and intensity haven't been very good, especially for those of you who kind of know the inner workings of the program a little bit, those Tuesday night press conferences that Kirby does. You know, doesn't love any press conference, but the one on Tuesday night, fresh off a Tuesday practice known as Bloody Tuesday, typically Kirby's probably least favorite time to meet with the media, if you had to guess. And oftentimes he's kind of in that, you know, kind of raw emotion that you have when you come off of a practice field. And sometimes he's like, I didn't think our energy was very good today. He said that before when he feels like he needs to. Well, for this particular week, that's not the kind of thing that Kirby Smart's saying at all. If anything, apparently he's like, maybe we need to make sure we don't turn this stuff up too much during practice here right now. So if you want to know how spirited and how fired up and how ready to go Georgia is for Saturday, Kirby Smart also talked about that himself some last night.
It's good. You don't ever have to worry about them on this week. You know, you got to be careful not to leave it all on the practice field. That's probably the biggest thing is holding guys back and making sure that they don't overdo it. But spirited, get after it, practice, and you know, it's like I said, it's when you get in these SEC rivalry games, it's not a motivation issue.
I want to be clear here that Kirby Smart was not asked about the Jalen Milroe situation, but I do find it interesting, given that's the topic we're having here right now, that Kirby, somewhat unsolicited, says, in my mind, I'm wondering, hey, do we have to hold these guys back a little bit? Kirby, who puts everything, his entire coaching career is sort of built on how hard can you practice, how much can you work during the week to make it fun on Saturdays. And Kirby's looking around right now saying, hey, maybe we need to hold these guys back a little bit. You know, maybe this is a little too intense right now. We don't want to leave this on the practice field. We certainly don't want to get anybody hurt. That's apparently how intense Georgia practices are right now. And is all of this or a portion of this powered by stuff like what Jalen Milroe said? If it is, I'm glad. If it is, I think that's fun. And if we can do anything to kind of push it in that direction even more, of course we're going to do it. And one of the guys that we've referenced on the show already this week, I just think stuff like this is so funny because I meet so many people like this who like live in enemy territory. And we've had a guy that's reached out to us a few times, and he lives in the Birmingham area. And it's just so obvious. And some of y'all live, you know, kind of in that area too, and I'm sure you're very much the same way. It's just so obvious this dude hates Alabama. Like when you live over there and you're around their people all the time, it's just so obvious. Hates Alabama. Let me show you this on the screen for those of you watching on video. His name's Jim Sparrow, and he's a big listener to the radio station I mentioned before, WJOX. And so he's been sending us all week long. He's been sending us all the crazy stuff that Alabama people have been saying on the radio as a way of kind of, you know, getting everybody else as fired up for this game as apparently he is, because if you live in Alabama, this is your Super Bowl. The same way for those of you who live up, you know, Dalton, Chattanooga area, you hate Tennessee, or Valdosta, you hate Florida. We've talked about this plenty. Columbus folks hate Auburn. Wherever you live kind of determines who you hate the most sometimes. And if you live in the enemy state, well, of course, you feel that way 10 times more, including our buddy Jim Sparrow here, who wrote to me and said, well, now Alabama color analyst and former quarterback Tyler Watts, he went on WJOX with Greg McElroy, and not only are they talking about Alabama winning the game, but Tyler Watts says that Georgia's going to lose 3 games here this season. And he actually shared the audio clip to go with this. So since Jim is kind of helping us stir the pot here a little bit this week, one more call from Alabama radio. This is the former Tide quarterback Tyler Watts, who I believe was on the losing end of the game in 2002, if I'm remembering correctly. But either way, Tyler Watts, sure enough, telling Greg McElroy that he thinks Georgia's going to lose 3 times this year. This is Tyler Watts.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating, man. Can't wait to see it. I know you'll do a great job on the calls.
Hey, and all
Go ahead, buddy.
Are you going to be shocked if Alabama gets this win today? Are you going to be shocked if Georgia ends the year with 3 losses?
So let me just say this, and this is kind of an aside, and not everybody's going to get this. But I've done like sports talk like this almost my whole life. Grew up doing this just almost my whole life. And so therefore, like, awkward radio moments make me feel very like I want to like escape my own body when I hear like an awkward radio moment. It just makes me like really like cringy, not like the way that the new kind of style of using cringe, like the old school cringe. Like I just sort of cringe when I hear that. It makes me very awkward radio makes me very nervous. And we all know this feeling in our own life of like when you're trying to get off the phone, you're like, all right, let me let you go. All right, well, listen, hey, listen, I'll talk. All right, you're doing these things trying to get off the phone. Like, it is so obvious in that clip we just heard that Greg McElroy's trying to get off the phone, trying to end the segment, trying to go on to the next thing. And Tyler Watts just won't let him go. Like, it's like, does that not make you kind of cringe a little bit? In fact, can we do this? We don't typically do this. Can I play this clip one more time? I want you to listen to how hard Greg McElroy is trying to end this segment and the fact that Tyler Watts, the Alabama quarterback, just won't let him go. And so many of us in our own life are like, all right, well, let me let you go. Like, we do this in our own life. I hate talking on the phone. I'm always trying to get off the phone. And in this case, it's so obvious that McElroy just wants the conversation to be over. They got a commercial break. They got, bills to pay, things like that. And Tyler Watts has got to keep it going. Hey, listen, I think Georgia loses 3 games this year. Listen to this again.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating, man. Can't wait to see it. I know you'll do a great job on the calls.
Hey, and all
Go ahead, buddy.
Are you going to be shocked if Alabama gets this win today? Are you going to be shocked if Georgia ends the year with 3 losses?
So there you go. You hear McElroy say, all right, go ahead, buddy. All right, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. We're 2 minutes late for a commercial break, but go ahead, do it again. Hey, I think Georgia's going to lose 3 games. So there you go. Georgia's going to lose 3 times. Jalen Milroe thinks they're quitters. On and on and on it goes. That's all the chatter coming out of Alabama. That's all the chatter coming out of, their radio stations and things like that. On the other side, all we know about Georgia is they're aware. Dylan Fairchild says, we're aware. Would you like to give us more details? Nope, I don't. We're aware. We're grinding. Aware and grinding. That's what Georgia is right now. Malaki Starks saying, all of this comes down to what do we do now to stop them on defense? Kirby Smart saying, the practice is so intense, you almost wonder you need to dial it back a little bit. So that's what you know about Georgia. Bama, mouth. Georgia, work. Now, it is not my intention, because I'm not like those people. It's not my intention to tell you it's going to be easy. It's not. I'm not going to tell you that all this adds up to a dominant Georgia win. Honestly, this is going to be a hard-fought game, and as someone who wears red and black for a living, I hope that Georgia wins. But I like the mindset. Do you like the mindset? I can't guarantee the outcome, but I like the mindset. Talk, coming from the West. Work, taking place here in our state right now. And, frankly, given that as the backdrop and the build up to this game, makes me very excited for what we might see on Saturday night. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. We're happy to have you with us. No matter how you get to us across video platforms, 10 a.m., radio, Athens Sports Radio 960 Ref, podcast, wherever you find them, Apple, Spotify, everything else in between. Just so happy to have you as a part of our show, and so thankful to our friends at Breda Pest Management who make it all possible for you there as well. The official pest control provider of UGA Athletics. That is what Breda Pest Management is. That is what they are all about, and that means they can be your choice for termites and pest control and things like that. They can do all of that for you the same way they do for Sanford Stadium and Stegman Coliseum and Foley Field and all the great athletic venues there at UGA. They can provide you the same level of service. And it's not just the prestige that you get of saying you work with the same company the UGA works with. You also get a chance to put more money back in your pocket just for making that decision. That is what Breda Pest Management provides for you there as well. In this day and age, given how expensive everything is these days, if you got a chance to put more money in your pocket, of course, that's something you should do. What I love is when I'm out and about and talking to folks who listen and watch our show and who are big Georgia fans, I'm hearing this all the time. BA, you said it, and it's true. I made the switch, and I save money just for doing that because my company that I was working with, cost of service goes up every year. The quality of service, it seems like it goes down. A lot of these companies don't even come inside your house anymore, which means they're not getting all the termites that potentially could be there. They're not protecting all of the areas of your house that could be protected. Well, that's not going to be the case with Breda Pest Management. So please find them online. It's bredapest.com. BREDA, bredapest.com for a lot more on that. All right, we are so jam-packed and busy today. It's Davin Bellamy before we are done. It's also a very, very odd story coming not just outside Georgia, the SEC, but kind of even outside the Power Four, and yet it is certainly almost a harbinger of things that could be to come for college football. We're going to talk about that here in a little bit. Mike Griffith also comes up in a moment there as well. But prior to that, let's go around the doghouse, presented today by our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau. And one of the big questions for UGA goes beyond motivation or game plan or anything like that, and it centers simply around health. And for Georgia, unfortunately, it is a cluster of injuries within one position group. Defensive line, getting guys ready to hopefully be healthier for Alabama than Georgia was against Kentucky a couple of weeks ago. And exactly how is that going? We got an update from Kirby Smart on that Monday. We talked to Connor Riley on that topic yesterday on the show. And last night, Kirby Smart gave us more details about exactly where it is for Mikael Williams and Warren Brinson and Jordan Hall as Georgia gets ready for this huge, huge showdown there on Saturday. Here is Kirby last night giving us another update on Georgia injuries.
Warren's continued to practice, taking his rep load. Mikael's been able to do a little bit. I still don't know the timeline on Mikael. He's looked good running and taking some reps, some light reps, some rush reps, some stuff he did today. It was his first day really getting out there and doing some things. But I don't, again, I haven't talked to Ron, so I want to go watch the tape and be able to see that. Jordan's still pushing through. Is that it? Feel good about Warren. Michael's going to be close, and Jordan is still trying to get into practice.
So there you go. That's a pretty matter-of-fact and, frankly, candid update from Kirby Smart. Sounds like a yes on Brinson. Sounds like a maybe on Mikel. And if maybe's all that it is, I mean, I'm not all that hopeful about Mikel Williams, to be completely honest, although I certainly don't have any medical expertise. And it sounds like Jordan Hall. I mean, the internet's saying that maybe he had some sort of setback or something like that because, I mean, obviously Kirby has praised his injury recovery. And, now it seems like he's not quite where he once was, which perhaps caused you to connect the dots a little bit there on that. So, I mean, I think just having Brinson out there would make a difference because you had a situation where, Christian Miller and Nazir Stackhouse, they were playing so many snaps against Kentucky. They were pretty gassed at the end. At least you would assume they probably were. And, maybe that means Xavier McLeod's also able to play a little bit more for you there too. This is a game where you'd love to have, of course it goes without saying, you'd love to have the full complement of your defensive line, but it certainly sounds like that's probably not the case for Georgia. And, I mean, I'm not all that hopeful about Mikel Williams at all on the basis of some of what, Kirby Smart has said. Of course, this is an SEC game. That means we'll get an availability report from Georgia today. I think based on what Smart gave you there, it gives you some idea of what that might say. And also you'll remember that going into the game against Kentucky 2 weeks ago, the initial availability report was changed on both Thursday and Friday, where guys who were listed as questionable were eventually designated as out. So keep in mind that we all kind of wondered how Georgia would use its availability report. Well, prior to the game against Kentucky, at least when it came to questionables and outs, they did use it pretty well. They didn't give you a lot of probables last week, but they did give you a good number of questionable. They for the guys that are hurt, they kind of used it to kind of give you some information, including letting you know as the week went on that some guys were not expected to play. We'll see how they choose to use that here this week there as well, and we'll make that around the doghouse presented today by our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau. And, of course, when it comes to Georgia Farm Bureau, they are serving Georgians in a really important way here right now when it comes to your insurance products. Obviously, insurance is one of those things, especially like auto insurance. Everybody has to have that. You want to have great coverage in your vehicle. Your vehicle is what you're using. That's what you're depending on to get you to work each and every day. And our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau understand that because they're just like you. You're a Georgian. They are Georgians. They're living and working and just kind of taking care of business in the state of Georgia just like you are every single day. And they understand the role that insurance can play in making all that a little easier for you because, as I said before, your vehicle is what you depend on. That's your livelihood. And they want to give you quality auto insurance on that to make sure that you kind of stay doing and getting to all the places you need to get to. Home insurance, very much the same way. Trying to, to just make sure you're covered and protected and just doing a quality job of serving you. Friendly people from the agents to the claims adjusters, everybody else. That's what Georgia Farm Bureau is all about. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to give them a call, 877-404-1050. That's 877-404-1050. You can also find them online at gfbinsurance.com. That's gfbinsurance.com. And when you talk to them, you're going to find out what I've known and what so many folks in our audience have known, that Georgia Farm Bureau truly is always the home team. They take care of folks in our state. They love our state. They've been a great advocate for our agricultural community for a long time, and now they want to give that same level of service to you. So please find them online, gfbinsurance.com, or give them a call, 877-404-1050. All right, so here on DawgNation Daily, we got a great guest coming up in a little bit. The former Dog Davin Bellamy going to be with us. Always a fun conversation. My understanding is we're still waiting here to get Mike Griffith squared away, so I apologize for that. Okay, now we do have Mike ready to go. So let me do this. Let's get Mike going here, and I'll give you an update on our DawgNation invasion here coming up in a couple of minutes, too. We certainly want to see you in Tuscaloosa this weekend if we can. But for now, everything for Georgia, getting ready for Alabama on Saturday, including the mood around the two programs. Let's cover all of that ground with Mike Griffith here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Let's say hello to Mike Griffith here. Georgia getting ready for Alabama on Saturday. Mike, we've said a lot this week. I like it spicy. I like an edgy Georgia. For whatever reason, that's just sort of Georgia at its best. We've tried to do everything we can to kind of conjure up those emotions. And based on some of the stuff that Dylan Fairchild said yesterday, Malaki Starks said yesterday, Kirby Smart's own recitation of how practice has gone, it sounds like the emotion for Georgia right now, the best I can tell, is right about where I'd want it to be. Doesn't guarantee a result on Saturday, but it certainly feels like the buildup is, I would say it's kind of right within the lane of where I hoped it would be. Is that the sense you get as well?
Yeah, you don't want the line to come out of the cage yet. I mean, that's not going to happen until these guys, get boots on the ground in Birmingham or Tuscaloosa, where the team hotel is. I'm guessing Birmingham. Look, Georgia is bringing their lunch pail and hard hats to work every day right now. Heads down, grinding, I think is how Dylan Fairchild put it. I mean, Kirby Smart, it's another day at the office. Georgia plays a lot of really good teams this year. This is one of the tough road trips, but there's no doubt that when that game kicks off 7:30, those guys are going to be ready to represent the G. And, you can thank Jalen Milroe for some of his comments last year. You can thank the national media for dropping Georgia from number one and creating some doubt about this program, putting them. You can thank Kentucky for putting the Bulldogs on notice. I think it sets up well for Georgia. I really do. Now, once the game gets kicked off and somebody gets hit in the mouth, I mean, things can change in a flash if there's a broken assignment or a special teams miscue. But I really like where Georgia's at from a psychological standpoint, Brandon. Kirby Smart's the best at this. This isn't his first rodeo. These players have played in marquee games before. Kalen DeBoer, that's what's different. Alabama's different. Now, it remains to be seen if freer and looser than Nick Saban means better than Nick Saban. That's the gamble. That's what Kalen DeBoer's doing. He's changed things up. And if he's able to have success, then, he'll king for a day. But I like Georgia's odds as the tried and true program that's been here before, that's done it, and the mood and the temperament that this team is carrying to Tuscaloosa on Saturday.
Yeah, to use your words, mood and temperament, I think the best that I can tell, it seems like that's in a pretty good place. And yet I think you would also agree with me that the outcome of this game is decided by so much more than that. Georgia does need to play better than it played against Kentucky. Yeah. I believe it probably will, because it seems like we see Georgia sort of do this before, stepping up level and performance in games that matter most. I'm assuming we at least see some version of that on Saturday, and yet still the need is there. Got to be more explosive offensively, got to be a little bit more consistent when it comes to scoring points. Obviously there are a lot of missed tackles in the game against Kentucky. Really on both sides of the ball, there are at least a handful of areas in which, beyond just having the right level of focus and motivation, the precision and performance kind of also needs to step up there as well.
Well, there's no question that Georgia has been tested, Brandon, and yes, there's been things exposed. I look at that as a positive. Now, the injuries aren't a positive. You never want to see guys get hurt, but I like the fact that Georgia has played two good teams, and I think Kentucky is a good team. The 31-6 loss to South Carolina aside, people can look that up and look into what happened that night, but Kentucky tested Georgia in ways they hadn't been tested in the first two games. Clemson has a championship front seven and offensive line. Kirby Smart knows more about his team, also through the continuity, than Kalen DeBoer knows about his team. I don't think Alabama has really been tested to the extent that Georgia has, and I think that's a positive. Now, you might say, well, Alabama carries a lot of confidence in because they were able to beat these teams so easily. And yes, there is a lot to be said for believing in your program, but Kirby Smart understands what Georgia has to do better. They've probably been able to make better use of the bye week, having been exposed in some areas, than Alabama, that really hasn't been challenged in ways that Georgia is going to challenge them. So, again, I hear your point. There are things Georgia has to do better, but at least Georgia knows what those things are. I'm not sure that Alabama really knows who they are yet.
Yeah, we talk about having an edge in the game. When I say something like that, I mean maybe by like a 1 percentage point, maybe not even that much. So what you just said, I sort of wonder, can this make a 1% difference for the positive for Georgia? The fact that Georgia has certainly played the more interesting schedule thus far. They played a ranked non-conference opponent. They've played a conference road game. Alabama has just the one Power 4 opponent among its first three games, obviously a blowout win at Wisconsin. I'm not telling you, well, that alone is enough to kind of get Georgia to the finish line here, because I'm not so sure any one thing is enough to get Georgia across the finish line. But if you gave me a choice as a fan, which resume would I rather have coming into this situation, the team that's slightly more tested or the team that's certainly less tested than along the lines of what Alabama is right now? I think that Georgia's road so far, I would assume, at least gives it a little more preparation for what's going to come on Saturday than maybe what Alabama's faced up to this point.
Yeah, for sure. And the continuity, right? I mean, there's a system in place. There's a way to do things. There's a buy-in at Georgia. Forget the close calls. Nobody's doubting Kirby Smart. These players know that if they paint by the numbers, they're going to get drafted high into the NFL and they're going to win championships. And that's been proven. Kirby Smart's not selling a vision, okay? He doesn't have to convince anybody of anything. These players chose to play for him. They chose to play for this staff. What, 85%, 80%? I don't know what percent of that Alabama roster signed up for Kalen DeBoer. So, and I'm not saying at the first sight of adversity they're going to melt, but I'm just saying that I think that Georgia is in a better position to handle adversity. And in the history of the series, there's been adversity for both teams when you look at these games. Now, you could say, well, Alabama's won 5 out of 6. Well, let's rewind. And, you and I have been sitting next to one another at halftime of many of these games. And one team might have looked like it had the edge over the other, and it ultimately didn't mean anything, because these have been back and forth games where these teams have been measured and the talent is somewhat equal. And I think it comes down to coaching. And this is where, again, I like Kirby Smart and his staff and their knowledge of the program. And it doesn't hurt that T-Rob's on the staff and has a pretty good idea about most of that Alabama personnel. It doesn't hurt that Georgia has last year's game film to go back and look at and say, geez, if Carson doesn't fumble at the 12 or the 10, or if he hits Arian Smith in stride here, or if Raylan Wilson doesn't bust on a 1st and 20 at the 28, these are all correctables. Even with Bowers and McConkey pedestrian that game with injuries, that's a game Georgia still should have won by 7 to 10 points if they play and execute. And that was last year's Alabama, which I would argue was probably in a better position with Nick Saban as head coach at that stage of the season than this year's Alabama, with a brand new head coach and a brand new staff that's only going into their 4th game of the season. So again, the intangibles set up wonderfully. I understand how it looks from 10,000 feet. Now, here's what Alabama's scores are. Yeah, they beat Wisconsin, and their second string quarterback, the starter got knocked out on the first drive. I dare say things would be very different for Georgia if it was Gunnar Stockton instead of Carson Beck. So I like where Georgia sits. I've got a lot of confidence in Georgia to win this game. I wouldn't be surprised if they won by 10. I think they're going to be able to run the ball effectively. I think ETN is set up. The offensive line, you've got Michael Morris ready to go in. I mean, yes, there'll be some drop, but maybe not as much as you think. I mean, Michael Morris is a hungry kid, Brandon, and we've interviewed him on DawgNation, and I mean, this is a guy that can't wait to get out there and prove himself against the Crimson Tide.
So you mentioned the fact that Nick Saban's not here. That's obviously the biggest storyline in the game. And I think sometimes we make things more complicated than they need to be. This is one of those things that probably could just be sort of spoken at in sort of simple terms. Kalen DeBoer is a good coach. He wouldn't have gotten the Alabama job if he wasn't. He won a playoff game a year ago and won a lot of games at Washington. If history began this Saturday, this would be a tough game for Georgia because of DeBoer. But history didn't begin this week. You are comparing this Alabama team to the Alabama teams of the past. And Nick Saban, I mean, the most hardcore Georgia fans would say is an all-time great coach, maybe the all-time great coach. And so therefore, the ability of him to put his fingerprints on a game would just presumably be greater than what Kalen DeBoer's ability might be. So how much do you think the absence of Nick Saban for Alabama matters? And just to ask it bluntly, how much worse do you think it makes Alabama not to have Saban in this game?
I'm going to twist that just a little bit. It's not the absence of Nick Saban. It's the presence and the distraction of Nick Saban that makes this more difficult for Kalen. He's playing on Saban Field. I mean, his co-host on his coach's show has accidentally called him Nick before. Yeah. He's got this impossible legacy to live up to. I mean, it really is impossible. He cannot possibly come in and do what Nick Saban did in this day and age. It's amazing that Kirby's won too amid these NIL transfer times. I mean, to me, it's some of the greatest coaching in history to win in an era where parity is apparently what people want, or is whatever. unintended consequence of NIL and transfer. So I like the fact, once again, that Georgia is this group that's tied together right now. Everybody's telling them they're not what we thought you were. And they've had this close call where they've had to look one another in the eyes on the road, staring defeat, down at Kentucky, a team on the even scarier. I mean, you lose to Kentucky. Oh my gosh, you're that Georgia team that lost that 14 game. I mean, you talk about pressure and adversity, and on a tough night when you're not playing your best and your quarterback's not making the throws and you're losing at the line of scrimmage. And somehow Kirby Smart pulls this game out. You got a motivated Vandergriff. Somehow Kirby pulls this one out. That should have been an upset. Kentucky had them right where they wanted them, and then they remembered they were Kentucky and punted on 4th down in Georgia territory. I digress. So typically, after games like this, Georgia responds. I couldn't have been more certain of the TCU game. Why? Because Georgia stared death in the eyes against Ohio State. Georgia stared death in the eyes against Kentucky. Kirby has their attention. Alabama, it's fun, it's loose, game day, President Trump, let's all have a party. Kalen DeBoer, I hope a lot of fun people. I hope a lot of people come. This is going to be a lot of fun. I've told the guys, do a couple more interviews. He's just, Brandon, it sounds like a guy that doesn't realize that he's in over his knees and there's sharks in the water. And I really like the way this sets up for Georgia.
Well, we'll certainly see about all that. It's fun to think about. Let me give you one more before I let you go. We just played the clip from Kirby yesterday on the Brinson, the McKell, the Jordan Hall. Sounds like Brinson's probably a yes. I would say the McKell's a maybe, trending towards no, and it seems like Jordan Hall, for whatever reason, is less healthy now than he maybe was a week or so ago. The name Nate Frazier doesn't come up very much, but Frazier didn't play very much at all against Kentucky. Didn't play in the first half and didn't really play in the second half until Trevor Etienne himself kind of got banged up. Carson Beck's shoulder, his AC joint, as they call it. Just give me kind of an overarching thought here on the Georgia health before we say goodbye to you.
Yeah, they're fine. To your point, I think Jordan Hall it's tough to ask a kid to come back from, broken bones. I mean, he's doing his best, but I don't think that he's really part of the immediate landscape. Brinson, yes, for sure. I think Michael will at least give it a try. I'm optimistic based on what I've heard from some people who were at practice. No guarantees there, as you said, but, I think Michael's going to want to show up for this game. There's a lot of money to be made for him and a lot of other Georgia players. I mean, this is one of these games where when the NFL scouts are evaluating NFL talent, they're going to put the tape in. This is a game that any team that's looking for a quarterback in next year's NFL draft will watch and rewatch and watch again and send all the way up the ladder. There's a lot of implications here. To your point, sometimes we make it harder than it is and we overcomplicate, but I'm going to pull it back to one stat. 21 straight times when Kirby's had more than a week to prepare, he's won that football game. You got to go back to Texas. And let's face it, Jim Chaney halfway out the door. DeAndre Baker sits out. Georgia players still pissed off. They didn't make the playoff when they should have. An inspired Texas team that can win 10 games for the first time in forever. It's set up for – and Georgia still only lost by a touchdown, right? Kirby is going to have these guys as prepared as they can possibly be. This is going to come down to Carson Beck executing and the defense not giving up those explosive plays to Ryan Williams, because that's how Bama beat you. They beat you with the explosive plays. This is not a team that's shown they can sustain drives to this point against quality opposition. So 21 in a row for Kirby with more than a week to prepare. The intangibles favor Georgia. And one thing we didn't bring up that I think we should, I'm not so sure this is not the best special teams unit of the Kirby Smart era. When you look at the kicker, when you look at the punter, when you look at the coverage units, no punt return yardage, when you look at Anthony Evans has brought a spark of life and good judgment to punt returns. The ETN factor. You want to know why ETN was out there last week, BA? Because he signed up for a Florida program and a coach that made him second string, even though he was the best guy in a losing program. ETN is here on business. He's here to make his mark. That's why he's late. This is a guy that's been through the battles. I like Frazier. Don't get me wrong. He's a future star, can't miss, all that good stuff. And he may provide a spark player here or there. But ETN is the guy that you're going to put this game. You're going to put it on his shoulders to get the run game going so that Carson has a little play action to work with and help out with these receivers.
Mike, good stuff. Certainly look forward to plenty more of your coverage from Athens. Obviously see you there in Tuscaloosa here this weekend. Thanks so much for your time on the program here today.
Appreciate it, Brandon. Have a good one.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, Mike, a big part of our Dog Nation invasion here this weekend. We'll tell you more about that here coming up before we're done today there as well. Also, Davin Bellamy 5 minutes from now. That's going to be a lot of fun, too. Prior to that, let's go cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And obviously, Utopia of the Seas, that's the destination for us. April of 2025. You want more of Mike Griffith in your life, you can also get that as part of our Dog Nation cruise there as well. And if you have not made plans, many of you have, but if you haven't made your plans yet to be with us for that this upcoming April, our friend Jessica Slater, she can help you out with all that. So give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. She's got you covered on all that. Utopia of the Seas is a gorgeous ship. When I found out that we were going to be able to do our Dog Nation cruise on this ship, I was thrilled. Y'all know how much I love Utopia. What a great brand new Royal Caribbean ship this is, and how much fun is that going to be for all of us coming up in April. We hope to see you there. So we're talking to Mike Griffith a moment ago about schedules and who's more prepared for what. And it's interesting in light of that, the fact that Georgia's played 2 Power 4 conference opponents. Alabama's only played the 1 thus far, the road game at Wisconsin. You know, Lane Kiffin was talking about that a little bit. They're getting ready to begin SEC play here this weekend, hosting Kentucky. Now, my guess is that the Kentucky team we see in Oxford on Saturday, maybe they sort of shot their shot against Georgia and maybe they don't have quite as much to give in this particular game here. Who knows? But Lane Kiffin has acknowledged that by playing a lot of sort of weaker, group of 5 type teams or FCS type teams to begin the season, the 1 road game at Wake Forest, he says when it comes to preparation for the game against Kentucky on Saturday, we can't quite be so sure how ready we are because of the schedule we've played. I think that's true for more than just Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss. I think that's also true. We're going to see Ohio State this week play a Power 4 team for the first time here this season. That a lot of this early sample size of the season has been colored by teams who are playing less than the level of competition they'll be forced to play if they want to make the playoff and then advance in the playoff. Georgia's a little bit different there in that regard. Doesn't guarantee that Georgia will be better, of course, but in terms of a little bit more of an accurate evaluation of UGA, I think we probably are able to make that. And I think that Lane Kiffin's probably right to be a little concerned about exactly what his team is bringing to the table, given the fact they've mostly been kicking around less than equal weight class competition here thus far. Brent Venables has had to offer an explanation for why Jackson Arnold, his starting quarterback to begin the season, has been benched, and obviously creates a little bit of a controversy there in Norman. I saw where Reese Davis was echoing some of the same stuff that we said the other day about the comments from Hugh Freeze on Peyton Thorne, that, we're in a day and age in which, fairly or not, a lot of these players are going to be treated as young professionals. And that means short leashes, harsh evaluations. It's not going to be quite as relational in college football as it once was. It's going to be a lot more transactional. Now, I still think that Brent Venables has maybe made a strategic error here and pulled away from Arnold too quickly, just given the fact that to begin the year, Jackson Arnold was sort of thought to be, one of the up-and-coming quarterbacks in the SEC. A short leash like this is often not rewarded because sometimes you create a scenario where if you do have to go back to Arnold, and at some point in time they may have to, you've maybe killed his confidence and now he's not able to perform for you. But, in this day and age, coaches like Venables are just not going to be quite as patient because it's their own job potentially on the line if the quarterback, doesn't play well here. So I do think we are living in a different kind of age in terms of how coaches manage quarterbacks, how they manage the roster overall, and how willing they are to speak out on it if a player's not playing well. We've seen a lot more liberties taken in that regard with coaches here this year, and perhaps that's the start of a trend. Now, speaking of a potential trend, boy, how interesting is this? Coming out of UNLV. Now, I don't know how many times we've actually talked about UNLV on this show in recent years. One of the better group of 5 teams. I've certainly, picked them before. Barry Odom, typically pretty live as an underdog since being out there in Vegas. Well, they've won a couple of games thus far this year, and arguably UNLV is in contention to be the best group of 5 team here this year and have a chance to make the college football playoff. Undefeated thus far this season. Matt Sluka, their quarterback, one of the reasons why. Apparently, he must think he's pretty good right now because he put out on social media yesterday that he's now going to choose to redshirt for the rest of the season. Essentially, this is an opt-out. Some will describe it as quitting on his team. Sluka himself describes it as promises made to him that have not been kept. He says that, hey, I was offered something, I wasn't given it, and so therefore I'm not playing. There are reports coming out of Las Vegas. 24/7 Sports Reporter had this. Others are kind of saying the same thing, that no, UNLV did meet its obligation to him. He just now thinks he can get more money elsewhere. Y'all, this is a very complicated topic. If the story is as Sluka has described it, I'm on his side, because I do believe that one of the unspoken truths in college athletics right now is there are a lot of programs who are making NIL promises that they are then not keeping. I don't think this is the only example of that. And a lot of attention gets paid to the player. People say things like, well, what's to stop a player from going to so-and-so school and then taking some NIL money only then to kind of transfer out, as if it'd be the player defrauding the program. But I think there are at least as many, if not more, examples of programs allegedly defrauding players. We don't hear as much about that because most of the sources, to be honest here, about media stories regarding NIL kind of come from within the NIL ranks, collective employees, things like that. And so therefore there's no benefit to kind of telling that side of the story. And so we don't hear much about that, but I believe a lot of that is true. However, if the other telling of this is what's true, which is that somebody got in his ear, told him he could get more money elsewhere, then I think the player's A, likely making a huge mistake, and B, this is a sign of something that's pretty unscrupulous in college football right now. You know, we judge and vet coaches because how they treat their players determines what kind of players you get in the future. Agent behavior, though, doesn't get vetted quite as much. And if some hanger-on, some agent's telling Sluka, oh, I'll get you more money somewhere else, just stop playing for UNLV, ask someone like Jamie Newman how well that worked out when you listen to somebody about opting out, what happens to your future there. So I think how you feel about this ought to be determined by which side of the story is true. This is certainly complicated and perhaps a sign of more to come in college football in the very near future. And for now, we'll make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Obviously for us, a lot of attention right now on the big game in Tuscaloosa on Saturday. And a guy who helps us get ready for these so well and does so much for us, it's the great former dog, always entertaining for us, Davin Bellamy, here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. Davin, we appreciate your time. A lot of talk on Jalen Milroe today's show. You know, he's kind of said some things. Georgia wants to stop him. Georgia fans want to see this Georgia defense go out there and stop him. So as somebody who's kind of told a quarterback to humble himself before, how does Georgia perhaps stop Jalen Milroe on Saturday? Admittedly, this is no easy feat.
Brandon, how's it going? And yeah, man, it's definitely not going to be easy. I think when you look at, Milroe, you see he's, of course, a mobile guy. And through my experience of, playing different styles of scrambling, QBs, you want to keep them in the pocket and make them play the game the traditional way. If he can extend the plays and you got your defensive lineman trying to go and get sacks instead of rushing as a unit and keeping him, inside the cage, it allows for those big plays downfield. But in my opinion, it's kind of like the quote that I said against Jalen Hurts when we roll into, the national championship. We actually want to keep him in the pocket and make him play quarterback. In my humble opinion, I definitely think that if we just can keep him in the pocket and make him play the quarterback position the traditional way, I don't think they can sustain 12, 13 play drives with him making the right reads without him getting antsy and that athleticism wanting to, come out and make a big play. So I definitely think if we just rush as a unit and do a good job, just keep him in the pocket and make him play the game the right way, then, it'd be easy for us.
Seems like that is a little bit different than maybe how Michigan approached him last year. And I'm not a former player, so you know so much more about this than I do. But it did seem like Michigan last year was more aggressive against Milroe than Georgia kind of was. So I kind of agree with you of like, hey, you can't let him break free because, A, that's demoralizing because you feel like you've got everything covered. And now this guy just goes and makes something out of nothing. And B, he's just really, really dangerous as a runner. But at the same time, man, I like sacking quarterbacks. I like seeing quarterbacks, brought down to the ground. And I do think there are a lot of Georgia fans who hope that in the midst of keeping him in the pocket, you still can find some way to kind of get after him, in some way to create negative plays, because it just seems like Georgia's at its best when it's doing some version of that.
Right. But when it comes to sacks, sacks are like, touchdowns, for a running back. Everyone wants, everyone everyone wants a touchdown, but not everyone is as excited as a 4-yard first down game, on the run, when it's really basically, the same thing. And I say that to say, we talk about sacks, but the main job for the defensive line is to affect the quarterback. If you get them on the ground and doing that, then that's just an A+. But you can still get an A grade in affecting, the quarterback if that's knocking him off his spot where he has to scramble and now he can't deliver the ball to his first read. If that is pushing the lineman back into him and now he can't follow through with his arm and now he hits his thumb on the guard's helmet and now he's out for the game. So in my opinion, just affecting the quarterback is more important. And to do that, you have to basically just take away what they're not, comfortable at. And with him, maybe sacks don't change the game. What changed the game for him is making him play the position like a quarterback in certain program, play the position. If it's 2nd and 10 and that 9-yard dig route, is not there, is Jalen going to check it down or is he going to try to scramble or force a ball? So I definitely think just making him play the quarterback position from the pocket will affect him more than sacks. Because when you try to get sacks, man, you got to burn the edge. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you get pushed by the quarterback and you got 4 guys, trying to get a sack. But when 4 guys rush as a group to keep a quarterback caged, and what we like to say, kind of like we used with Baker Mayfield, was make him throw for a whale. Make him throw out and up like he's throwing a rock from the bottom of a well versus having those lanes where your defense ends are rushing too high. He can step up here and step up here, and now he has easy, target lanes. And I can get into the analytics of that, of how a quarterback, if he steps up in the pocket, I learned this from Bill O'Brien, my time in the NFL. If a quarterback steps up in the pocket, his percentage of completing the pass goes up 60%.
Wow, what an interesting.
So when you're dealing with a quarterback, you want to take away those gaps where he steps up here and here, and now he can go here and here. You kind of want him to always back up, and make him throw from a well. And I just think if we can do that and just create a chaotic cage, not guys trying to get sacks, but a chaotic cage, I definitely think, he'll give us at least 2 picks.
What an interesting evaluation, Davin. I'm really glad I asked you that because I think that's a really sharp point to make.
Right.
And we can all see that, right? If you're kind of back like this, I'm left-handed, but if you're back like this trying to release the ball, I mean, obviously that's not as good of a throwing angle. And if you can create bodies in front of him that kind of force him to make the awkward throwing angle, it is a more difficult throw, right?
No doubt. And even, when you see how much of the body is used to make an accurate throw, you understand how affecting the quarterback is so important. And I didn't realize that until my later years of playing professional football, where it gets harder to get a sack. So the defensive scheme is more focused on, okay, if we can get a sack, we can get one, but let's focus on affecting him. And, a quarterback has to follow through with his hips. So if he has a lineman that's right in front of him and now he can't torque his body, now his hip is not in it, or he can't follow through because of the arm, now you're looking at a ball that usually sails over the right receiver's head because he wasn't able to follow through, or a ball that doesn't have the velocity because he wasn't able to put his hips in it because of the pocket presence. And that's where you see a lot of guys have to rely on those arm angles. But those are the Patrick Mahomes, and those are the, those are only select few. But in my opinion, I think Milroe is a great player, but I think his main thing is scrambling and allowing you, because he can see you. So a lot of mobile quarterbacks like when edge rushers use speed, because we think that we're Lawrence Taylor, but they can see you. So he wants you to rush high, he can step up, and that makes those explosive plays downfield so much easier to happen because he doesn't have, basically anyone blocking his vision.
Really, really interesting stuff, Davin. That's really smart. Obviously, against Kentucky, there was some chatter about, Pro Football Focus. Some of those sites had these numbers, a lot of missed tackles, a lot more than we're used to seeing from the Kirby Smart era. I assume some of that was about maybe some guys being gassed. You had a lot of guys playing a lot of snaps. What do you attribute that to, and how much work do you think Georgia's done over the last 2 weeks to make sure that you don't have that same problem against Alabama? Because obviously you don't want to give them any extra yards.
Right, right. Well, definitely when it comes to the tackling aspect of the game, it's basically off of resting. You try to prepare your guys, to tackle and practice, but you usually not bringing guys down, to the ground. So that's usually tackling is a technique that you can teach, but it's more so a live game rep that you have to do because you can't practice it in practice. If you do so, then you won't have guys ready for Saturday. So you try your best to have a physical practice, but keep guys, off the ground. But when it comes to that, it was only week 3. And like I say, the first week we played Clemson, in my opinion, is not a very physical team. And then we had, the Tennessee State. But then I think, Kentucky was our first real test. And even I said that on our show that Wednesday, where the season starts now. I wasn't really impressed with Clemson the last 2 years. And then, of course, we had, the Tennessee State. Well, now we're on the road. We're in the SEC. We're playing a physical team. So this is the first real test. So I definitely think against our defense last week, that was the first time they kind of got with a team that was just as physical as them. And now you have to, it's not practice. Now you're not holding somebody up. You have to take somebody down to the ground. So I just think that the duration of the season, and of course, with this bye week, Kirby Smart noticed the same thing. And one thing I know about a Kirby Smart, led team is the bye week is used for fundamentals and getting better and taking your weakness and making it a strength. And the run game and tackling was definitely one of our weaknesses these first 2 weeks. So I definitely think that the bye week this week, they focus on the tackling a lot.
How much do you think Alabama misses Nick Saban on Saturday, if at all?
A lot. Even though we're 1-3 against Bama since 2020, the common denominator is not there. And I'm a big fan of, and I'm a big believer of, when it comes down to the SEC and games like this, the talent is basically, equal. Everyone was a 4-star. Everyone was a 5-star. Got the same facilities. We got the same weight room. It's the same food. This comes down to the coaching. And, probably Kirby Smart would never admit this, but we all know that, probably the only coach that Coach Smart stood across from the sideline and thought, okay, at halftime, this guy may make better adjustments to me. This guy may be the better coach. Even though he'd never admit that, we all know that, Nick Saban is, that guy that if you was going to say, name 2 coaches that you think are better than Kirby Smart, he may be the one that you name. But I think just not having that across the field, it kind of puts the Joker card, in our hand because the talent's the same. Both teams are going to be ready. There's going to be a speech that one coach is going to say that's going to get the other team hyped. This is what these guys came to the school for. Primetime game, Georgia versus Bama. Now, who's going to put their team in the best position to win? And I just think over the years, Nick Saban has had that wiseness about him to where he kind of knows the perfect adjustments to make. And every game with Georgia and Alabama, was close. But I definitely think this is going to be a close game, but the small detail is going to be, who has the better coach and who players are prepared. And I think that, lies with us, finally this time.
I think that's beautiful. Last thing before we let you go, because of what you said, Kirby Smart's dominated pretty much everybody, but obviously Alabama does have, a handful of wins against Kirby here. And, Saban, the coach that was the architect of that, he's not here anymore, but it is the same opponent and it is a big game on the road. For Kirby Smart individually, how big do you think this game is on Saturday?
I think it's very big. Like I say, he'll never say this because he's, so humble and he always says the right thing. But, with Saban gone, and me being around, Coach Smart for 2 years, I kind of know his personality. And with Saban gone, he wants to show the world, that I'm the big dog now. He was the sensei and I was the youngin' up under him. And I could never, get over the hump with him. But now that he's going, this is my town now. And I definitely think he wants to show the Georgia fans and also, show himself that, I'm not 1-3 against these guys. Even though the record says that, I am a better coach. I do have a better team than these guys, and we can beat them. So I definitely think just for the psyche of Georgia fans and the team, without Saban being there and us finally having, the best coach in college football, the best coach in the SEC, in my opinion, man, this is not a legacy game because it's not a playoff game, but it's kind of teetering on the, legacy game was Saban's not here. Now it's really time for me to take over like I should have been.
I think that's right. I think you're absolutely right. Davin, great stuff. Always appreciate it. I'm looking forward to seeing you Saturday night. Man, I hope we're talking about a Georgia win. I certainly think we will be, but I certainly hope we are. Either way, Davin, your thoughts are always so sharp here, so I appreciate that. Thanks for being here as part of DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management here today.
Always, man. Appreciate you, man. Go Dogs.
Go Dogs, indeed. Great stuff from Davin Bellamy. Really locking in on, how you stop Jalen Milroe and the kind of thing that probably only a football player could say about, what you do to prevent him, not just, getting out of the pocket and taking off and running, but stepping into the pocket where you're just making a more accurate throw. And even if we're not, former quarterbacks ourselves or former pass rushers ourselves, we can understand that. It just seems like it is, when you're moving forward, stepping into the throw, it's just going to be an easier throw to make. And I think that's really sharp there from Davin Bellamy. A couple of things here before we let you go here. Let me first of all remind you, as we said, DawgNation Invasion goes down Friday night and Saturday. Big event Friday. Our buddy Mike Griffith is going to be a huge part of that. Saturday, tailgate. Can't wait to see all of you there for our DawgNation Invasion tailgate. In fact, we got the DawgNation Invasion t-shirt. If you're watching video on the screen, you see that. The Dogs socking it to Alabama. We certainly hope that's the case. Taking over Tuscaloosa. We are looking forward to all of that. And there's still a limited opportunity for you to be a part of it. So please go to DawgNation.com/tailgate. All of this brought to you by Atlanta Sports Trips, Discover Dunwoody, Dr. Pepper, Meriwether and Tharp, Kroger, and R.S. Andrews. Be a part of it. There's all kinds of options here. If you just want the tailgate or the Friday night party, you can have that. If you want to be a part of the tailgate, but you've already got your room and you want to travel with us to Tuscaloosa from the suburban Birmingham area, we'll give you a chance to do that. If you don't want to fool with like Tuscaloosa traffic, Tuscaloosa parking, we got you covered on that. The bus itself is going to be a party all the way over to the tailgate. So one of our biggest events of the year. Can't wait to see you for it. DawgNation.com/tailgate for a lot on that. And speaking of one of our great sponsors, obviously our folks at Dr. Pepper, y'all know how much I love them. And I'm so proud to have Dr. Pepper as a part of our DawgNation Invasion events here this year. Dr. Pepper, obviously a huge part of game day for me. And listen, on Sunday, one way or another, I'm going to be driving back to Georgia. Hopefully I'm doing it with a smile on my face after a win. But either way, I'd never get across the state line. I'd never get out of that, awful state of Alabama back to my comfortable home if I wasn't powered by Dr. Pepper on the way. So obviously we're going to be safe, keep our hands at 10s and 2, and keep the eye on the speed limit and everything like that. But the fuel I need, the same way the vehicle needs the fuel I need to go rolling down the road is with a delicious ice-cold flavor, the one-of-a-kind flavor that Dr. Pepper's famous for. It's a pepper thing. So as you're enjoying game day or as you're celebrating after the game, Dr. Pepper, of course, a great choice there for that. You can go to drpepper.com for more details on that there as well. So tonight, our Kaylee Mansell, along with Jeff Sintel, they got you for Before the Hedges, presented by Kroger. Speaking of another DawgNation Invasion sponsor, my guess is there'll be a little bit more tonight on Usmani Chroma getting ready to make a college decision. That's interesting stuff. Jeff had a story about that up. Also, amazing performance by Todd Robinson there for the Valdosta Wildcats. They got a big one against Camden County in Region 1 on Friday. Weather permitting, I guess. But I'm sure plenty of that tonight Before the Hedges, presented by Kroger. Can't wait for that. Golden Shoe, you know the theme we're obviously all about. Taking a knockout punch to the Alabama Crimson Tide. Our buddy Robin Barkalot gives us this, obviously using the power of AI here. So you've got the dog knocking out, is it Big Al? Is that his name? You get the Georgia Championship belt. Michael Buffer makes an appearance here. Some of y'all know Bruce Buffer. Old school guys like me know Michael Buffer. You love to see that. Robin writing in, DawgNation Daily, don't worry, we're going to be ready to rumble. Hashtag punch the pachyderms early and often. Steamroll the Tide. Go Dogs. Beat Bama. I don't mind going a little elephant hunting there on Saturday. That sounds like a pretty good thing to do. Robin, well done for you on that. A well-earned golden shoe coming your way there for that. And by the way, great to see Michael Buffer making an appearance on the show here today. Really a great ring announcer from my time growing up for sure. You love to see that. Lousy, stinking Gators. They're not ready to rumble. They're not ready to do anything other than just, continue to wallow in their own misery. 1,418 days. That's how long it's been since Florida has beaten Georgia. That is our Gator Hater Updater. Have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. And on video. Time now for the R.S. Andrews School. R.S. Andrews is one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. You can trust R.S. Andrews on all of that. Greg Rosenberg says on YouTube, when this is over, I'm going to need one of those Royal Caribbean cruises to recover. Greg, honestly, that's pretty well, how I live my life, right? It's like I try to run, the needle in the red for the full fall as much as I possibly can. And like the intensity, the feeling, the emotion. Then when it's over, you just sort of kick back and relax. Go on Utopia of the Seas, go on Icon of the Seas, one of these great Royal Caribbean cruise ships, and just blow off some steam and just let it all relax and kind of get back, centered and grounded once again. Because you can't live this way forever. We couldn't even do this each and every week. This is one of the reasons why Georgia, I believe, has had some ebbs and flows to its performances over the course of the last couple of years. You can't, you cannot be this way every week. You just can't. And obviously, if you're Kirby, you've got the job of sort of figuring out, well, how do you get the right level of emotion for the games that you need it the most? And, we joke about, using the trash talk and stuff like that. But for the most part, we're only kidding, right? I mean, the actual recipe for how you create the actual proper level of emotion is a lot more complicated than I make it sound. But you got to find it a few times in a year. You got to find it. And listen, without getting too philosophical, regular life is sort of like that too. There are just a few moments in which being at your best in life is a really good thing, and that you can make a very different life for yourself depending on how you are in that moment. You see some girl somewhere that, has a chance to be your future wife. You walk up, you say hello. If you get the right charm, the right presentation, who knows? Maybe you change your life forever because of how you present yourself in that moment. Same way when it comes to your work and things like that. How you perform in a couple of moments can turn your whole life around. And so in college football, we have those versions of this. And one way or another, this is one of those weeks for the good or perhaps the not so good. Gary Roach asking me if I remember the old school jingle from the 80s, the I'm a pepper, you're a pepper, wouldn't you like to be a pepper too? Like that was kind of like the tail end of its when I was a kid old enough to remember TV commercials. And when you're a kid, especially back then, commercials are sort of back now because YouTube makes you watch them. For a long time, let me go on a rant for a second. I think sometimes we don't realize what they've taken from us. Do you realize that for a good portion of the 21st century, we were essentially, commercial free, other than obviously, great sponsors like the ones we have. But, like your TiVo and commercials, things like that. Well, now, YouTube just kind of brought commercials back into our life again. But anyway, that's a different topic for a different day. Let's see what else. Hey, He Hate Me 870 says, if Georgia wins, no excuses. They deserve the win, but highly unlikely it's going to happen. We'll see. We'll see. Aaron Dixon shouting out for an RC Cola float. I definitely had some RC Cola growing up. Now, people always talk about like an RC Cola and a moon pie. I don't know that I actually ever did that, but I did have some RC Cola for sure. By the way, shout out, speaking of moon pie, the great Mike Moon Pie Wilson from my alma mater of Johnson High School. Neil says that Facebook went down. Is that true? What happened? Oh, Lord. What is going on there? The other platforms seem to be working. Tom pointing out that saying more syllables 1,400 days sounds better than 14. It's actually a pretty good point. It's a pretty good point. Tom, I may try to adopt that. I think that's a pretty good point. That's a pretty good point. SEM Dog says, here's hoping that Davin Bellamy gets to tell Jalen Milroe to humble himself after the game. I do like that too, SEM. That's good for sure. Yeah, Kent Holcomb checking over at DawgNation.com. I guess something happened on Facebook today, y'all. I'm sorry about that. Scott Harris likes Davin Bellamy. Yeah, Davin brings a lot to the table. And, like, one of the things I like about Davin is like, he really wants to be good at this, which he's got a good personality. So he was going to have a step up, you know, just because he's got a good personality. But he really wants to be good at this too, which is always going to make a big difference. So I mean, he's bringing a lot to the table because he's putting a lot of effort into his commentary, which I really, really like. Randy Hall says, when are we going to give score predictions? So what is today? Wednesday. So I'll give you a little inside baseball here. So Wednesday afternoons is when we record our Friday show called To Go With The Flow. So one way or another, I got to make my pick. We're going to record this at 2 o'clock today. So by 2 o'clock, I will have had to make my official pick. So I would say starting tomorrow and Friday, I'll start talking more about that. I have a basic structure built around the pick that I'm going to make. And obviously many of you know, and I don't say this, you know, braggingly, just backstory is important sometimes. I have picked the last 3 Georgia games precisely accurate, like darn near perfect. But I also said the remainder of the season just gets more difficult to pick because in this particular case, you know, we used mostly previous track record to make the last 3 picks, and that worked for us. There is no previous track record when it comes to Georgia, not just against Kalen DeBoer, but on the road, regular season game against Alabama, because we really haven't seen that either. So all of a sudden now, you don't quite have the obvious template in place for these future games. Savannah Bryan says that Davin's better than almost all the analysts on the SEC network. Yeah, but do me a favor. Please don't say that. I think you're probably right. But please don't say that because I'd like to at least get through the rest of the season with Davin. Like, I don't want him to pull a UNLV quarterback on me. No, I'm kidding when I say that. I mean, I'd love to see him do that. Now, Davin's also still playing, too. You know, Davin plays in the spring league, so he may not quite be ready for anything like that as of yet. But, like, one of the problems we have around here is our people get jobs, you know, like, Jake Fromm, for instance, Jake's coach. You know, it's like we have these great collection of analysts that we love using. They all go out and get jobs. So I'm kidding when I say that, but I do agree, Savannah. I think he does a great job. Richard D says, what are the keys to a Georgia win? I mean, to me, it's real simple. It starts with Georgia's got to score 30 points. We've joked about this a lot, but to a degree, not a joke. Georgia has set flat-footed 24 as a point total in their last 3 losses to Alabama. Road game 2020, SEC championship game 2021, SEC championship game 2023. Coincidentally or not, Georgia finished with 24 points in each of those games. You've got to find a way to get to 30 to give yourself the best chance of winning. That's about, was it 34, 35? That's what Texas scored winning at Alabama last year. It took more than that for LSU in 2019 and more than that for Ole Miss in 2015. Those are the last 3 losses for Alabama at home, different era of the program, of course, but the last 3 losses for Alabama at home, 30-something points is the low water mark in terms of points scored to get the win. Now, how does Georgia get to the 30? As I said yesterday, to me, it's a touchdown in every quarter, and then some other score some other way, whether it's a field goal, a defensive score, a turnover that creates a short field, somehow. You've got to have 4 legitimate touchdown drives, 1 in every quarter, and then some other score some kind of way, and that gets you to 30. And then if you can get to 30, even if we would say this defense is still a little bit of an unknown commodity, especially given the health situation of some of the guys up front, I trust Georgia to keep them in the 20s. And I'm a little bit of a broken record on this. You've heard me say this a lot over the years. 30-something to 20-something is about how you win a big football game in this era of college football. I don't see any reason to deviate from that right now. It's a 30-something, 20-something kind of game. And if you can score in every quarter, you get to be the one that has the 30-something. That, for me, is what it is. Terry Westbury says that if weather is a factor, the game could be close, but if not, Georgia wins decisively and makes a statement. So interesting to hear that confidence coming from Terry. I appreciate you weighing in on that. Let's see what else. KC says, how about 33-18 for a final score? I like your thought process in that, KC. I like it a lot. Greg Hendrick says, wouldn't it be sweet if Kirby's been holding back so nothing's on film and they just go out there and blow out Alabama? Yeah, listen, I'd love to see that. I'd love to see that. And one of our guests this week, it may have been Connor who pointed this out. So you go back and look at the scripted plays for Georgia to begin the game against Alabama last year. They're throwing all kinds of stuff at Alabama, and it was mostly working. But can you match that level of creativity once you get past the scripted portion of your offense? I guess that's a question worth answering, too. Lance D says Milroe has to be put on the ground repeatedly over 4 quarters. Yeah, I kind of agree with you on that, Lance. He says Georgia can score 27-30, but it won't matter if you can't get Milroe down or inside the pocket. Yeah, I mean, at the very least, you got to have some negative plays coming from somewhere. I think you do. Jacob Penley says, can you buy the invasion shirt only, or is it only part of the bundle? That's a really good question. I don't know. I mean, they've gotten pretty creative because I know they've sold the bus to a few folks. I don't know. Maybe reach out and see what they'll say. I'm honestly not sure about that. I'm honestly not sure about that. G. Grace pointing out that this channel is free. It is free, but if you do want to pay me directly, I will allow that. I will allow that. If you want to pay me directly, I will allow that. So G. Grace, if you or anybody else wants to donate some money, I will allow that. All right, a few more comments. Kenneth Holt says Georgia needs at least 3 sacks and 100 yards rushing. For sure that's the case, I would say. KC on London Humphreys. So you got new information kind of coming out here a little bit, it looks like. So did not see as much of him post Clemson for what it's worth. Yeah, you're seeing some of this. Yeah, this is coming 2 minutes ago from DawgNation.com. I'll just read this to you here real quick. So Georgia I'm reading just straight from the page. Georgia will likely be without wide receiver London Humphreys when the Bulldogs take on Alabama this Saturday. So I guess Mark Weiser, Athens Banner Herald, had this first. He has mononucleosis. So there you go. We've had mono make an appearance on the show. That's also. Did you ever know anybody had mono growing up? It's tough to shake. Like that's one of the. Jay, you've had mono. Yeah, tough to shake. One of the things that stays with you kind of for a while. So I mean, Humphreys was. A real hero after the game against Clemson. I was going to make a joke about getting too many kisses after that game, but I don't even know. I don't even know if it is a kissing disease. That's what they used to say, that you got it from kissing. I'm being told that it is not transmitted by kissing, but that's what they used to say. A lot of y'all heard that growing up. Yeah, see, Greg Hendricks heard that. Greg Hendricks heard that. See, there you go. Lance D asking about Michael Jackson, not the pop star, but the Georgia wide receiver. That is a guy I don't hear very much about, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing. He may be the next Don Hudson. But that is a guy that I just don't hear very much about, for sure. Let us see what else. So Dustin Flowers says we won't win rushing 4 on Milroe. I've talked about this before. There was a really good, I used to have this. Now I can't find it. It's one of those things like I've changed laptops, and also I'm really, hopefully on the show I present a certain, project a certain, I don't know, buttoned up, whatever. But away from the show, I'm very disorganized. And I lose a lot of stuff. I used to have this like really good like coaching clinic video of Kirby Smart talking about how you can get a pass rush against a running quarterback. It's really interesting. A lot of it's sort of over my head, but it's still really interesting. So Kirby, obviously, in these moments has sort of talked about how you get some pass rush against a running quarterback and how you try to disguise that a little bit. We said this yesterday that some of the best of Georgia going back to 2021 was the interior pass rush coming up the middle, which, if you pair this now with what Davin told us, and this is really smart from Davin, like beyond smart, that you don't want Milroe to have pressure coming off the edge and simply step into it. Like when I was a kid, they used to say the same thing about John Elway and guys like that, that if you did pressure them, better to pressure them coming up the middle, because if they're moving to their side, they're making less accurate throws. Those guys, if they see the pressure coming off the side, even though we kind of have the chance for like the blind side, just pow. If you just take one step forward, now all of a sudden you're in a really good position to throw. Think about like the really good version of Georgia sending those guys up the middle. I mean, Nakobe and Channing Tindall, to a certain extent, Quay Walker is probably more Nakobe and Tindall, just rockets, on the interior pass rush sometimes. Maybe there's some of that. Well placed, of course. You got to dial it up at the right time. Lance D predicts Georgia win 33-30 with an interception ending Alabama's last drive. You may be right, Lance. That may be what we're heading for. But, man, that's going to be hard. I mean, you talk about like crazy emotions. That's going to be crazy emotion. In that stadium with that noise, it's going to be a madhouse on Saturday for 1,000 reasons. If it's an interception to end a 2-minute drill from Milroe, wow, how wild will that be? That'll be crazy. All right, a couple more we're going to go into our Facebook, folks. I'm sorry we've had issues today over on there. KC wants to see Anthony Evans playing a little bit more. I mean, my understanding is he's probably pretty close, and he's a guy that could do some big things. So maybe the mononucleus, is it mononucleus? Is that how you say it? Mononucleus, is that how you say it? Let's just call it mono. The mono report for Humphreys, maybe that creates an opportunity for Anthony Evans. Baggins and friends encouraging folks hit the like button. Baggins, I appreciate that. Taylor Russell's got $60 down on KJ Bolden getting a sack. I kind of like that too. He's also a guy, by the way, I mean, in the sack that he got this year, they sent him off the edge. They could send him up the middle too, I guess, right? He hate me says, if you send a blitz on Milroe and you don't get there, that's the worst thing you can do, because obviously he can throw it deep after that. Yeah, I mean, there is no free lunch in football. That everything you do makes other things more difficult. So, I mean, like the one thing that we know Jalen likes to do is throw deep. In fact, that's what who was saying that the other day, that he was more worried about him throwing deep than running. He didn't say it like that, but he was asked about who was it that said this? He was asked about, what's the biggest concern for Jalen Milroe, and he mentioned the deep ball. So, yeah, I mean, if you send pressure and you don't get there, then that gets bad real quick. That's why you got to get there. Let's see what else. Darian Ford says, it's hard to believe I've been watching this show since Rick was the coach. We've come a long way, and I'm glad to have shared these members of DawgNation. Darian, I am too. Love seeing your name in the comment section. Appreciate that. We've been through a lot together. Good, bad, everything else in between. And it's just fun. I mean, it's just fun. Kind of trying to solve interesting problems is just sort of a good thing to do. It's a fun pastime. And so we're all sitting here trying to figure out how this game's going to play out and who's going to do what and what's going to happen. And ultimately, it's just kind of a fun way to have a conversation. And I just think it's great. I really, really do. I am so grateful I get the chance to kind of narrate and facilitate this conversation, and grateful that so many of you want to have this conversation. Like, it just does not get any better than this. And I'll say this real quick. Let me plug in. For me, this is what college football is. And I feel like I've said this before. Maybe it doesn't always make sense. Like, I love Georgia winning a championship. That's really cool. I love winning a championship. But the purpose of a championship for me is the big games required to win it. Like, it's the big game week. That's my championship. I love the build-up to a big game. I just do. Maybe that's because I talk for a living, and so therefore the talking part is fun for me. Maybe that's the case. But when the season's over, even if Georgia wins the championship, I'm sort of sad the season's over. Like, in other words, like, I'd give the championship back if that meant we could just play some more games. I love the build-up to the big game. Love the build-up to the big game. And obviously the championship is the goal, but it's this kind of stuff that when I think about college football, this is what I think about. Getting ready for the big game and seeing how many of our predictions or our assumptions about how the game is going to be played, how many of those turn out to be true. College football always has a way of surprising us. This is what college football is to me. Yeah, Darian Ford says he feels the same way, 100%. Darian, I'm glad you're here. Green Soldier checking in today. Speaking of folks who've been with us for a long time, you'd love to see Green here today. Taylor Russell says the game has more deeper implications than just playoff seeding. It does. It does. And for me, it's a little bit hard to describe exactly what they are. But this is more than just Kalen DeBoer trying to win his first SEC game, Kirby Smart trying to get what has proven to be a fairly rare win against Alabama. There's more to it than that. And there's certainly more to it than, hey, the winner of this game has the inside track on getting to Atlanta. There is a lot more to this than that. And some of this can maybe be articulated. Some of this may be a little bit more difficult to discuss. Some of this may be just sort of beyond our full consciousness. But there's something going on here that's more than just a football game. I would say that's probably true. A Green Soldier says it's time to let Beck or let it rip. I think it's time. I think Carson Beck probably knows it's time. I think he's ready. I really do. I really do. All right, let me go back to DawgNation.com for a minute, and then we're going to go. Matt Rukavina says, yeah, winning the championship is obviously the goal, but then you're like, well, crap, the season's over with. Yeah, it's just, like, I don't like when the season comes to an end, even when the season comes to an end with a national championship. Johnny Prescott says, does DawgNation 950 do anything for you? Any Jack Lord vibes and the classic theme running through your head? First of all, I love old TV theme songs. I'm a little old. I should say I'm a little too young for like the old days of Hawaii Five-0, but I do know that song. I love that song. I used to have the reruns. My grandfather was a policeman, so we used to watch all like the police dramas on reruns together, and Hawaii Five-0 is definitely one we used to watch. I love that song. Let us see what else. Herb Hamilton says Kirby Smart would have fewer losses to Bama if the defense had just adjusted the quarterback changes. It's like we compete with one quarterback style, but the change threw us off defensively. I mean, listen, 17 and 18 were hard. They were tough, no doubt about that. And we can, have all kinds of thoughts on that, but one way or another, it just kind of comes back to those were tough games for sure. Savannah Bryan says of the Dogs heading to Bama early since Friday's not going to be flying weather. I would say there's a chance that's the case, but I mean, it's also not as simple as that. And this is one of those things where, like, obviously I talked to a lot of high school coaches, and in the early portion of the beginning of the year in the playoffs, high school coaches are traveling a lot. And like managing travel is really, really hard. And so from Kirby's perspective here, okay, well, if you're worried about flying on Friday, well, then therefore you just fly on Thursday. But now it's like 2 nights in a hotel, and that's a different routine. Georgia could care less about the money. They'd buy the hotel if they had to. But that's a little bit of a different routine. Does that mess up your Thursday walkthrough? Do you worry about, I don't know, so it's like if they had to, obviously they'd leave whenever, but I'm guessing they would prefer not to because rigid adherence to a routine, if anybody's ever been, committed to that, it's Kirby Smart. Dennis B says he thinks they'll take buses to Tuscaloosa. Kirby did say yesterday that they've been in contact with Delta, so they will fly. It's a really short drive, and I'm guessing there was probably a time in Georgia's past when they probably did drive to Tuscaloosa. I think they certainly used to drive to Columbia, South Carolina, which is about equal distance away. But I believe those days are long over for Georgia. So yeah, it's a very short drive, shortish drive, but they will fly. Let us see if there's anything else. Yard Dog says, hey, keep in mind another thing that makes this game different for Bama is the absence of Caleb Downs, which is an interesting point. That is also an interesting point. Let's see if there's anything else. Bobby Mean says, are there any updates in the storm? So I'm terrible at weather. I really am. I mean, I think as far as the game itself goes, I think we're looking okay. As far as the state goes in anticipation of that, it sounds like tomorrow may be like a real, quagmire. I don't quite know what that means, though, moving forward. I know high school football, some games have been kind of moved around. Obviously, I don't relish any of that. Craig Rosenberg says, forget DeBoer and Kirby. This game is big for me. I'm crumbling under the pressure already. Yeah, I know what you're saying. I know what you're saying about all that. All right, we got to go. Foster Moss says, I'd love to be a fly on the wall and hear the Kirby pregame speech on Saturday. Yeah, I would too. Is this one of those where he really kind of pulls out here's what I don't know. Maybe one of these days we'll ask Jake or Davin, one of these guys. We obviously hear some of these. Are the ones that leak out like the truly special ones, or does he essentially do the same thing every week, but it's just only a small few that kind of make their way to the public? I'd be kind of curious to know that. All right, we got to go. Good stuff. Y'all check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. Plumbing emergency, listen, you may have water all over the place as it rains here this week, but don't have water all over your house because of some sort of plumbing issue. Reach out to RS Andrews right away online at rsandrews.com. They can take care of all of that for you. So please find them online, rsandrews.com. They bring the cool down to us each and every day. They Go with the Flow with us on Friday, too. We'll see you there for that. And back here tomorrow for DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. We'll look forward to talking to you then.